How's it going, everyone? I hope you're having a great day because today we have a story of a bully that gets absolutely destroyed by the substitute teacher. It's a great karma story. I don't know, man, but listening to karma stories, it just feels so good to me. So sit back, relax, subscribe if you're new and enjoy story videos. And we're calling the subscriber in today's story John. So this all happened one day when John was in 7th grade. And John had a regular teacher in his history class. However, the teacher was sick and was pretty sick, had a pretty bad case of the cold, but happened to be out for an entire week. John didn't know this at the time, but the substitute teacher just came in every single day that week, so his teacher happened to be out for the week. And this substitute teacher was pretty epic, was a pretty cool guy, as you will see. It's not apparent at first, but trust me, the payoff is totally worth it. There's also a bully in John's school, unfortunately, and the bully is in John's history class. History, yeah, okay. In John's history class, right? And this bully has been kind of known as like the bully for the longest time. John is in 7th grade and he's been going to the same school since he was in 1st grade. And this kid has always been known as a school bully since 1st grade, since the first year John has been there. And obviously, as the kid has gotten older, he's gotten more, crueler and more sophisticated with his bullying. But he just never stopped. And John would always tell his parents, and his parents were like, oh, well, he's going to grow up someday. And let me just say, it has been 7 years. It has been 7 years of long bullying. And John's been waiting for long enough. So this all happened. Let's go to day one. So day one, John comes into class, and he's waiting for his regular teacher, and the substitute teacher walks in instead. And John's like, oh, okay, I guess we have a substitute today. And the substitute is like, hey, class, my name is Mr. Davenport. I will be substituting for Mr. Kavanaugh because, he's sick today. And if he's sick for any other days this week, I'll be substituting as well. We'll be doing normal activities. Class will be continuing as usual. I've studied the lesson plan and things will be normal. So anyways, on the first day, class was fairly normal, and, John was sitting with his friend, Ben. Ben is not the bully this time. He normally is. Whenever I have a bad character, I always name him Ben, because we're just calling the bully. So John and Ben were sitting together, and they were doing some kind of some reading activity in the class or something. And that's when they look over and they see the bully. And the bully is with his other minions, So a lot of times in school, the bully will have his minions that do whatever he says. And the bully had his minions in this class, and they were sitting there and they were snickering because they were crunching up and chewing up wads of paper and then spitting them through tubes, so kind of spitballing people in class. And people would turn around and be like, hey, who did that? And they'd look away and snicker. Everyone knew it was the bully, but they also didn't want to mess with the bully because the bully was known for upping his bullying against anyone who kind of fought back. So it was kind of just known that the best thing you could have done in that situation was kind of just ignore it, because the more or the less you ignore it, the worse it gets and the harder it is to actually ignore. And John turned to Ben. He's like, this kid's been the worst for the longest time. Is anyone ever going to put a stop to this kid? Or is this kid ever going to grow up? And, Ben is like, dude, I totally see this guy becoming some executive of a company and doing this exact same thing to his subordinates. I see that happening. And John's just like, dude, I know. I told my mom this years ago that he was a bully. My mom's like, oh, he's going to grow up, John. He's going to grow up. Well, he's growing up to be a bigger butt than he was before. And the thing is, right, the bully overhears this. And the bully turns around and is like, hello, John. And John's like, oh, hello there. And the bully's like, well, did I hear you guys talking about me? And Ben is like, no. The bully's like, well, I don't know. Last time I went to the doctor, last time I got my ears checked, the doctor said that they were pretty good, that I could hear quite well. So I really don't know what's going on. Because I thought I heard my name. And John's like, nope, you must have heard it wrong. The bully's like, well, I guess that's the case. And that better have been the case. Have a good day, fellas. Bully turns around, goes back to making spitballs. So John and Ben are kind of talking with each other. And that's when John feels a wad of wetness appear on his neck. And he looks at it, and sure enough, it's one of the bully's spitballs. And the bully and his little minions are laughing or whatever. And Ben's like, you shouldn't, don't react, John. And John, he does kind of he does the cool thing, but also probably not the greatest idea. He takes a spitball and he throws it right back at the bully. And the bully, like, it catches him, like, on the eyebrow. And the bully peels the spitball off of his eyebrow and looks directly at John and legitimately just says, "You're going to regret that." And Ben whispers like, "Dude, why did you do that? Everyone knows if you just ignore him, he'll go away." And John turns to his friend Ben and says, "Bro, I've been ignoring him for the longest time. Everyone ignores him and he just gets away with this all the time." And Ben's like, "Was that worth it? Throwing that spitball back at him? Was that really worth it?" And John's like, "You know what? Yes, it was." So the bell rings and everyone's leaving class. And John is like quickly leaving the class to go to his next class when he immediately finds himself on the floor because the bully stood in front of him, stuck out his leg very stiffly. John tripped on it and fell right over. And John's backpack like wasn't zipped up all the way and it kind of like flung over his head and everything spilled out in front of it. And the bully says, "Nice trip, John. Hopefully I'll see you next fall." And John's like, "You didn't even say the joke right." So Ben comes over, helps John get his stuff back up. And Ben's like, "Man, what did I tell you? You don't want to be messing with that bully, man." And John's like, "You know what? I've had enough of not messing with them. You know what? This is war, man. This is war. And maybe I'm going to be the first one, and maybe I'll be the only one to stand up to this kid. But you know what? I'll be damned if no one else stands up to this kid. I'll be damned if I let this kid, like, bully me again." And Ben's like, "Okay, we'll have fun being tripped." And John's like, "Well, it's not very funny, Ben." And Ben's like, "I'm serious. Like, this kid's going to go hard until you stop." And then John's like, "Well, I'm not going to stop." So the next day rolls around, right? And, John goes into school and he doesn't really think anything of it. And he goes into class and this kid is just staring him down the entire class. And John and Ben are sitting together. And this isn't like an activity class. This is kind of a sit there and listen to the lecture class. And Ben kind of leans over and whispers, "John." John's like, "Yeah, what's up, Ben?" And Ben's like, "Dude, the bully's staring at you." And John's like, "Dude, I know. His eyes are piercing the back of my skull." Sure enough, right, the bully has just been like staring at John, kind of smiling. And his two little minions are like staring as well. And the substitute teacher at the front of the class doesn't seem to be paying any attention to this. Little did you guys know he actually is, but that's for later in the story. He comes in to be pretty epic later on. But anyways, John's like, "You know what? I don't care, Ben. He can stare at me all he wants. If he really wants me like that, I'm going to have to let him down softly because I don't want to hurt his feelings." And Ben's like, "Dude, you're getting yourself in really deep. I don't know if this is a good idea." And Ben's like, "This is a great idea. This is probably my best idea yet." It was maybe not John's best idea yet because John gets up to leave and he's very careful not to trip over anything. And that's when he's met at the end. Like, as soon as he leaves the classroom, he bumps right into the bully who's standing there. He's like, "Oh, hello there, John." And John's like, "Hi." The bully's like, "Well, I don't know if you're available this afternoon, but I just gotta have a word with you this afternoon." John's like, "I'm actually busy. I gotta go home." And the bully's like, "I think you'll find time. I think you'll find time." And then the bully and his minions walk away. And Ben walks up to him. He's like, John, what just happened?" And John's like, "Dude, what?" "He just came up to me and said, am I free this afternoon?" And Ben's like, "Oh my God." And John's like, "Dude, what?" "He just said if I'm free this afternoon." And Ben's like, dude, no." And John's like, "Dude, what is going on?" And Ben's like, "Bro, that's what he tells people before he beats them up, bro." And Ben's like, "Dude, what?" And John's like, "Yeah." John's like, "What?" And Ben's like, "Dude, you gotta hide." And sure enough, John is starting to take this a little bit more seriously because while the bully is not that harmful, like physically, when you don't push back, in the rare cases people have pushed back, he is trying to continuously like show his authority, basically, show his dominance. Or however he chooses to do that. So Ben and John are like, John's like, "All right, well, this probably isn't a good idea. We got to find a way to sneak out of school because there's like one main exit and kind of like the place where people get picked up because John rides the bus, right? There's like a place where the bus always arrives, but to get there, you have to go through this main hall. And Ben and John sit down and realize that the bully is most likely going to try and intercept them in the main hall and like pull John aside and, give him a few 1-2s, you know what I mean? And so John is like, "All right, Ben, well, we gotta figure this out." So they look around, they find another exit, and so they basically decide to skip their next class. Normally a bad idea, but this is quite the circumstances. So they're looking around And, they look and they're like, oh my God, here's another exit. And then they see it's a fire exit. So if they push this, they'll push the fire alarm. They'll get in a ton of trouble. It'll just be it'll be a bad situation, right? It'll be a bad deal. Real quick, if you made it this far into the video, comment bully down below, and I'll try and heart as many comments to say that. I just want to see how many people, and I also want to see the names and the faces of the people supporting this channel by watching this far. If you don't know, the best way to support this channel is just by watching the videos. It's called watch time. YouTube really appreciates that. So if you want to really support the channel, maybe now or later, sit down and watch 2, 3, 4, watch as many videos as you possibly can. And also, you can do this while gaming, drawing, trying to go to sleep, cleaning your room, literally whatever. And please go in the comment section down below and tell me what you are doing while binge watching the videos and supporting the channel. And I'll shout some people out, like the person on screen right now who is doing this. So thank you to this person on screen, as well as thank you to all of you guys for supporting the channel by binge watching the videos. With that being said, let's get back to the story. So at this point, right, John and Ben are looking around frantically, skipping a class, right? So they're taking it pretty seriously, trying to find an exit, which is not going to be the exit that the bully expects, because there's normally one main way that everyone leaves the building and then goes to the bus or goes to get picked up. And they're assuming that the bully is going to know this, which, I mean, he is going to know this, and he's going to be waiting there, and he's going to pick John up and give him the whole 1-2, right? So John and Ben are looking around, and they do find an exit. However, unfortunately, it is a fire escape. And Ben is looking at his watch. He's like, dude, we got 10 minutes till the bell rings. And John's like, well, can't we just wait it out? And he's like, dude, like, you're going to miss the bus, and then you're going to be stranded here. And John's like, I could always call my mom and say I missed the bus. And Ben's like, bro, they're going to know that you didn't leave, and they're going to come find you in this building, one of his minions at least, right? And then you're going to be stuck here probably for an hour without your mom coming to pick you up. You don't want to do this. And John's like, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to walk there and just like let it happen? And Ben's like, we still got 10 minutes. We can figure this out. So John and Ben are frantically like going around the school trying to figure it out. And that's when Ben actually has the brilliant idea of John. And Ben's like, what? And John's like, what? And Ben's like, dude, I figured it out. We're not supposed to be looking for doors. And John's like, dude, what do you mean we're not supposed to be looking for doors? And Ben's like, windows, John. There are no fire exit windows. And John's like, oh. So then now they start looking around, and a lot of the windows are like glued shut or way too high or have like some screen in them. But that's when they go into the bathroom, and they find glass windows that when you like crank them, they go up, and when you crank them, they go down. There's no massive drop. It's like a 3-foot drop or something. They're not super big, but you can put your backpack through them, and then you can crawl through them as well, and it's the perfect escape. And that's when the bell rings. And John and Ben are like, all right, or Ben's like, all right, John, let's go. So sure enough, John pushes his backpack through, Ben pushes his backpack through. John gets up there, goes through the window, drops down, says it's all good, not a big drop or anything. Ben goes through, does the same thing. They get their backpacks on, and they sneak around the school, and then they see the bus, and they sprint towards the bus. And they're sprinting towards the bus, they get on it, and they both sit in the back. And when they both sit in the back, they're looking out, and they see one of the bully's minions walk out to the bus and look around, right? And that's when the bully makes eye contact with John and calls back. And John's like, dude, they see us. And, Ben's like, okay, what we need to do is we need to go to the front of the bus. And Ben's like, or John's like, why would we need to go to the front of the bus? He's like, shenanigans happens in the back of the bus, John. And John's like, okay. And then Ben's like, the bus driver will not allow this kid to beat you up in the front of the bus. And John's like, all right, totally fair. That makes a lot of sense. So John and Ben go all the way up to the front of the bus. And that's when, as they're about to leave, the bully gets on and says, oh, John, I thought we were having a little date this later tonight. And John turns to Ben and he's like, see, I told you he's into me. And Ben's like, pay attention. And the bully's like, so sad that you had to avoid us. Well, I'll be seeing you tomorrow. So anyways, the next day in history class, John and Ben are sitting together, and the teacher is handing back, grades from a test that, was administered the week before. And the bully was sitting behind this girl. Let's just call her Caitlin for the sake of this. She doesn't really come up again, so I'll call her Caitlin, and if I forget, who cares? So the teacher's giving back the tests, And, John and Ben did fine. John got an A minus, Ben got a B, like totally fine grades. And when the teacher gives the test back to Caitlin, Caitlin ends up getting a C. And, C is, I guess, fine enough. It's not a grade you should be shooting for in a lot of cases. Maybe some math classes I can understand. But either way, Caitlin was really not happy with it. And the bully turns around and is like, oh no, the waterworks. And Caitlin starts crying a little bit. The bully's like, oh no, did you disappoint your parents again by doing bad? Well, next time, just try harder, Caitlin. And the bully turns around and his minions are laughing. And, John is like, dude, this guy's legitimately the worst. Do you see why I'm standing up to him? And Ben's like, are you really standing up to him? Like, you're just running away from him at this point. And John's like, what would you do in my situation? And Ben's like, I don't know, be a bystander, stay quiet, like keep my head down and wait till I get to leave middle school. And John's like, that's not the point, Ben. That's not the point. This kid is doing this and we're allowing it to happen. And, Ben's like, yeah, we are. It sucks. What do you want us to do? John's like, I don't know. And no one was noticing, but the substitute teacher was starting to really pay attention to everything that was going on in class, right? So after school again, John and Ben, they're going around, they're walking around, and they're going to the bathroom, right? And they're skipping the last class, or they're leaving 5 minutes early from their last class because they have to get quote unquote picked up early. They faked like a absentee note from their parents or whatever. So they're out of class 5 minutes early and they're both walking to the bathroom. And that's when they run into the substitute teacher. Substitute teacher's like, hey boys. And they're like, hey, Mr. Davenport. And Mr. Davenport's like, boys, I don't think you're supposed to be out of class yet. And, Ben's like, yeah, well, we have a reason. And John's like, no, we left class early. And Mr. Davenport's like, boys, you can't be doing that. And that's when John's like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to tell him everything. So John lays it out and tells him literally everything. And Mr. Davenport's like, wow. I was starting to pick up on some themes going on as well as, the bully did in class to Caitlin today, but I didn't know it went down that deep. Are you boys able to get any evidence for me? And, the kids are like, what? And, the substitute teacher's like, yeah, I've actually been putting together a bit of a file recently on this kid. I was a little disturbed when I saw him trip you, and I wanted to really, really I wanted to stand back. I wanted to be a bystander. I wanted to watch what was happening so that I could collect enough evidence so that this kid, who seems like a real systemic problem, could be dealt with properly. And at this point, right, John's like, wait, so you saw that all? And the substitute teacher's like, yes, but, what power do I have as a substitute? However, I do have the power, if I sit back and watch and observe everything and write it down and get evidence, that I can submit a real file and really get a mark on this kid's record and maybe stop him for good if he wants a future. And John's like, oh my God. And Ben turns to him and says, like, dude, we need proof that this kid's going to try and beat you up. And John's like, I don't know how we're going to do it. He always words it weirdly. And John's like, well, maybe I should go meet him. And the substitute teacher's like, I don't think that's necessary, right? Like, I don't want to put you in danger. And John's like, no, but I need to get this kid gone. And substitute teacher's like, well, I don't know how much the administration would like this, but I can stand guard, and right before anything happens, I can come and break it up. And John and Ben kind of look at each other like, okay, this is like some scrawny random substitute teacher. What if he really holds no authority? And John's like, well, I got to stop this kid somehow. So sure enough, right, John turns to Ben and says, Ben, you need to record everything. So Ben has his phone out and he starts recording, right? And they walk down the halls. And Ben's trying to be it's not super obvious with his recording. So he kind of pretends like he's just on his phone. The flash is off. He's able to record it pretty well without it being super obvious. And eventually, so they're walking down the hall and the bully's like, well, boys, I wasn't sure if I was going to see you today. It's great that you're here. And he's like, Ben, I don't really have any issues with you. You can keep going. And Ben's like, well, I'm just going to wait for John. Will you ride the bus tomorrow? The bully's like, I don't think that John will be riding the bus today. And Ben's like, well, then I won't be riding the bus today either. The bully's like, fine, well, then stand over there unless you want to become collateral damage. And so Ben does step away. And, the bully starts coming up to John. And John's like, what are you going to do to me? And the bully's like, no, I'm just going to, we're just going to have a little time. And then the bully, like, kind of comes up to him menacingly. And he's like, why did you disrespect me in class 2 days ago? And John's like, you spat a spitball at me. I just threw it back to you. That sounds fair. The bully's like, there is a rule of law here. There's a hierarchy here. Some of us are above others at this school, and I'm just here to enforce it. And John's like, how are you going to enforce it? And the bully lifts up his fist and says, this fist will make contact with your face. That is the rule of law at this school. And as soon as that happens, the substitute teacher sprints out of there and is like, hey, break it up, boys, break it up. And, the bully turns around and says, oh, Mr. Davenport, like, nothing's going on here. I'm just having a talk with my friend. Mr. Davenport's like, well, it doesn't look like that to me. John, I'm going to need you to come with me. The bully's like, no, John's staying with us. And Mr. Davenport's like, I can get the principal over here. And the bully's like, fine, you know what, John, we'll have a little talk later. Go ahead. See you in class tomorrow, Mr. Davenport. And the bully and his minions walk away. And, Mr. Davenport's like, oh my God, that was so close. Like, that was really reckless of me to even let that happen. And John's like, no, we got it on a recording. He turns to Ben. He's like, Ben, you got that on recording, right? And Ben's like, yep, got it on recording. He's like, audio? Checks it. He's like, yep, visuals? He's like, visuals are pretty good, a little shaky, because I didn't want it to be obvious. I caught it all. At this point, right, Ben, Mr. Davenport, and John, they all go back to Mr. Davenport's, like, classroom, or it's his substitute teacher, so it's like the other teacher's classroom, but they go to that classroom, and John's like, hey, can you call up my mother and say I'm not gonna be like that, I had to stay late for an extra help project, and that that I'm not gonna be able to make the bus. So Mr. Davenport calls up his mom, and John's mom's like, oh my God, are John and Ben in trouble? Mr. Davenport's like, actually, the contrary. They wanted to help me with an assignment, and they will be getting extra credit. And John's like, oh, that's so nice. Whatever, right? So afterwards, John, Ben, and Mr. Davenport sit down, and they basically construct a case against this kid. They construct bits of evidence. John starts hitting up other kids in his class, basically asking for testimonials. They are making a full takedown of this kid, right? Of years and years and years of just everything, right? And at this point, they end up with a really solid case file. They have enough to at least get him suspended, if not expelled from the school at this point. So the real nail in the coffin is when, Ben turns to John. He's like, John, do you remember James? And they're like, yeah, James, whatever happened to him? Ben's like, dude, that was the kid that, the bully actually beat up. And so basically, right, there's this kid who they haven't spoken to in a while, but there was like a rumor that like the reason why he was gone for a week is because he was in the hospital and like because the bully like beat him up. And when he tried to like say that like, oh, the bully did it, the bully was able to weasel out of it. And John's like, dude, with all this evidence, if we got like a medical record about James and put him in the case, we could get this kid out. So they contact James. He's not really responding, but Ben remembers, oh my God, I was in like a 6th grade group chat with this kid. I have his number. So they call him up and James is like, hello. And Ben and John say, hey, I don't know if you remember us. They explain everything. And James is like, look, this kid has been giving me grief for the longest time ever I tried to rat him out. I've been out, like, he isn't giving me any more grief. Like, I don't know if I want to do this because, look, I will suffer the consequences if he doesn't get completely, like, kicked out of the school and, my name's attached to this. And then Mr. Davenport speaks up and says, hey, like, James, you don't know me, but I'm the substitute teacher, Mr. Davenport. I happen to be decently good friends with, the teacher, well, to say Mr. Kavanaugh, that was the name I gave him. With Mr. Kavanaugh, it's one of the reasons why, he recommended me to come in for this week. And he said, I will make sure that this kid gets, expelled. And the two boys were looking at each other like, wow, like, this guy's serious. And, James is like, all right, well, I don't know how much I can help, but I can definitely get you the medical records. And they're like, can you do it by tonight? James is like, yeah, I'll talk to my parents, but we'll see. And John and Ben were like, all right, we'll see. Thank you so much. Like, tonight would be the greatest. We're trying to get this in by tomorrow, and things might leak if we don't. So anyways, later that night, Mr. Davenport's like, all right, just send me the stuff on your school email. It doesn't matter. It's on school email. I don't care. So sure enough, right, the next day or that night, James sends them like a medical record. He said, this is the date, this is the injuries. Like this, like it wasn't enough to put this guy away, or not put this guy away, but get him suspended before. But hopefully, James is like, hopefully with all the other evidence you have, this will be enough to get the bully out of the school. So they send it to James. James sends it to Mr. Davenport. And Mr. Davenport is like, all right, men, like I will need you tomorrow bright and early. I'm going to excuse you from all your classes. You're coming with me. We're all going to go into the principal's office and we're dropping this bombshell. So the next day rolls around, as it always does. But this was a special day. They all walk in. John, Ben, and Mr. Davenport walk to the principal's office. They sit down. John and Ben explains everything that's happened, not just this week, but ever. And Mr. Davenport explains all the things he's observed. And the principal's like, wow, this is quite a lot. And Mr. Davenport's like, well, this isn't it. And Mr. Davenport then sends like the terabyte large, okay, it's probably smaller than a terabyte, but the very large file that they've created with all the evidence, with all the like the references, with all the people's testimonies. And the principal's like, wow, this is intense. And Mr. Davenport's like, it's really thorough too. And so basically, right, the principal's office, like, we need a couple days to like go through this. And the principal's office, like, you know, Ben and John, like, you guys can be excused for the next couple days. You're not suspended, you're not anything. But if you want to take the next couple days off just for your own protection as we vet through this, that's totally fine. So John and Ben were like, oh, shoot, like, of course. The school contacts their parents. They explain that they're not in trouble. It's for their own safety. And John's mom's like, oh, John, you should have told me about this, whatever. So a couple days go by. And that's when Mr. Davenport emails John. And the headline of the email is, the verdict is in. So John immediately, he sees the notification on his phone, and he immediately opens up the Gmail app, and he's just swiping and refreshing, and he eventually opens up the app, gets in there, opens the email, and it's one line saying,
click on the video on screen right
won.
now. I know you'll enjoy it. Just click it, do it.